Exactly 2 years ago, I made a video on this channel talking about my favorite film version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. It was not a big Hollywood motion picture or anything. It was a little VHS tape made by a company called Rabbit Ears, narrated by Glenn Close, and it wasn't even really animated so much as it's just illustrations and very minimal movement going on, if any at all. Usually it's just the illusion of movement. But it was something very near and dear to my heart from my childhood that, I used to rent every October from the library. Well, that video became one of the most popular videos on my channel and remains the second most popular video at the time of this recording. I got so many amazing comments in response to that video telling me how they loved watching the same version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow when they were kids, and they used to rent it, and that they love the Halloween season as well as much as I do, and they love the town of Sleepy Hollow, or they live in Sleepy Hollow or Tarrytown. And I just got so many great comments just relating to this and thanking me for making a video on something that no one else really pays attention to, but clearly was part of a handful of our childhoods. But the most common type of comment I probably got was people recommending other film versions of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I covered a couple of them briefly in my video, like the 1949 Walt Disney animated classic version in Ichabod, as well as the very strange, over-the-top, loose adaptation by Tim Burton in the late 90s. But really it was all focused on that one version for the most part. But while I got a handful of recommendations of different versions of this story, there's one that I got the most recommendations for. Multiple people recommended a 1979 made-for-TV version starring Jeff Goldblum. Well, as luck would have it, last year, in the fall, I actually found the VHS tape of this video at a thrift store that I, frequently go to, and I got it for $1. The only drawback is I did this a little over a week after Halloween in November, so my window to post the video had just passed. But no problem, I said next year I'll watch the video and I'll make a review of it, so that's what I'm doing right now. So without any further ado, let's move on to this version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. The first thing to take note of that I wasn't expecting was that it's a comedy. There were some comments telling me the movie was really funny, but I didn't actually expect it to be intentionally funny. I thought it was going to be awkward in that Jeff Goldblum, you can't really tell if he's trying to be funny or not kind of way, because Jeff Goldblum just has a bit of an awkward funniness to him all the time, whether he's intending to be comedic or not. But no, it is all out intentionally a comedy movie, and I wasn't expecting that at all. It's a welcome change. I mean, it's a fresh take on the story. I just wasn't expecting it to be a comedy at all. And as for the comedy, a lot of it lands. There's a lot of it that does not land. There's some that's just cheesy, very old-fashioned sitcom kind of humor. But I think a lot of it actually lands pretty well, especially with Jeff Goldblum. There's just sort of the way he reacts to things, like how he thinks he's being frequented by this ghost of a man that he thinks died, that was killed by the Headless Horseman. He just keeps appearing to him throughout the movie, and Jeff Goldblum's response to him is so dry and sarcastic and matter-of-fact that it's like the character of Ichabod Crane, played by Goldblum, knows that he should be terrified. This is a weird situation that he should be freaking out right now, but it's kind of like this is the only way he can act in such a crazy, ridiculous situation. He just kind of takes it all for what it is and just reacts very matter-of-factly. And a lot of the sarcastic comments he makes are just hilarious. His reaction is so believable but ridiculous at the same time. A lot of that comedy lands really well. There's one scene in particular I remember where the supposed spirit visits him in the middle of the night, and Jeff Goldblum's reactions are just so funny at that point. He's just spot on with the comedy. So I do think it definitely wins in the comedy department for the most part, but not all of the comedy lands. But I think that's true for, anything comedic. when you have something like this that has such a small budget and, you know, it's much older and it was just made for TV, they're not going to get like top of the line comedy writers. I wasn't expecting it to be like Mel Brooks or anything, but for what it is, it's pretty darn funny. It's a good effort. A couple things did bother me about the film. I think one in particular is kind of a minor preference thing, but it takes place entirely in the winter. Everything is blanketed in snow. And, you know, the way I always think of the story is that it takes place during the harvest time, you know, hence the pumpkin for the head on the horseman and all. I always think of it as like a fall, autumn thing, like it takes place in October at Halloween time. So to not see any red or orange or yellow trees and leaves everywhere and apples and pears and all that fall imagery in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is a bit of a bummer, because, you know, you just see so many bland looking sceneries with just white snow everywhere. I really wasn't expecting that for the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, so that's just like a personal preference thing for me, but I found that to be a bit of a bummer. I would rather see, you know, the fall represented rather than the winter. I actually really thought in the first scene that it was only going to be for the first scene, like, you know, it was going to go over the seasons, like he shows up in winter, Ichabod Crane, he shows up to Sleepy Hollow in winter, and then they'd show, like, you know, in spring he's, you know, meeting Katrina Van Tassel, then in summer they're getting close and a romance is starting to bloom, and then in fall Brom makes his move. But that's not what they did. It all takes place in the winter. It all actually happens very fast, which is how the story always goes, but I thought they were gonna do a different approach and kind of draw it out over the course of a year, but they didn't. Speaking of Brom, I do have to also mention another complaint I have is the characters are a bit too old. I think the actors playing the characters, they're not like old, they're not elderly or anything, but they seem a lot older than they were intended to be in the original story, or for how the character behaves. So Irving never really stated the age of any of the characters, but we can assume that Brom Bones and Katrina and all of them are quite young, because for that time period to, you know, not be married yet and be in that position where your father wants you to marry some eligible bachelor, and Brom playing all these like pranks and having like friends of the kids in the schoolhouse who are playing pranks for him on Ichabod Crane, like he just seems like he's younger. I don't think they're quite meant to be kids, but probably like 19, 20, 21. Although honestly, with how much earlier, you know, work and marriage and everything happened back then, it's very likely Irving might have even been imagining them being 17 or 18 or something. But I'd rather think of them as, you know, maybe 20, 21, 22, around that age. But in the movie, they seem a lot older. Most of them seem like at the very youngest, you know, the actors are probably in their 30s. Jeff Goldblum seems the youngest of all as Ichabod Crane, which is strange because you would think, if anything, Ichabod would be a little older than the others because, you know, he's this established, wise schoolmaster who comes to town. He's already been a schoolmaster before, so you'd assume he has at least some years under his belt over Brom and Katrina. But in here, Jeff Goldblum is significantly younger than Katrina and Brom, I believe. At least he looks a lot younger. Brom Bones looks like he looks like my uncle. He looks like he's in like his 40s or 50s. I don't know how old he is. He might be in his 30s. I mean, I look like I'm 60 and I'm only in my 30s, so everyone ages differently. But, you know, he looks and sounds just like a much, much older man. Like he's a dad. He feels like a dad in the movie. And he has like a little underling lackey, like a buddy of his who helps him with all his schemes and stuff. And, you know, he looks older too. And they all look a lot older. Like everyone seems really old. So it's like, it's kind of odd when, you know, back in those days, they'd be unmarried and that Brom would be playing all these schoolhouse-style pranks on Ichabod Crane and acting like a jealous teenage boy if he's actually as old as he seems like he's meant to be in the movie. So I did think the ages were very strange in the movie, honestly. Aside from his lackey character, there was another potential love interest character thrown in who is in love with Brom Bones. She's obsessed with Brom Bones. And her father wants her to marry Ichabod Crane. But Ichabod Crane is into Katrina Van Tassel, and Brom Bones is into Katrina Van Tassel. And Katrina is swaying towards Ichabod, like in the book. In the book, Brom and Ichabod both like Katrina, and originally she's really Brom's girl, and then Ichabod starts to, sway her towards him. Then Brom scares him out of town and ends up marrying Katrina. Well, in here, there's this other woman who wants to marry Brom Bones. She's obsessed with Brom Bones. And Brom doesn't really want anything to do with her. He's obsessed with Katrina. But Katrina seems like she doesn't even like Brom in this one. Like, she gets really fed up with his crap. And it seems like she really doesn't care about Brom in that way. She's all into Ichabod. But even then, Ichabod's like, saying he's seeing ghosts and stuff. So everyone thinks he's a loony also. So it's kind of like a complicated situation. So they put in this new character, and I guess I have to say spoilers now, because I'm going to spoil what makes this version really not faithful to the original book, which I'm fine with, actually. I actually thought the ending was funny. So as we all know, as I just stated, in the original story and most adaptations, Brom Bones is very, very, very heavily implied to be the Headless Horseman. That the Headless Horseman isn't real. Brom just uses it as a way to run Ichabod out of town and get Katrina all for himself. It never comes right out and says that. Irving never comes right out and says that, but the fact that Brom always laughs every time he hears the story and everything, it's very implied that Brom Bones set the whole thing up and that there was never actually a Headless Horseman. Some versions change that, like Tim Burton's, it was like Christopher Walken was actually the Headless Horseman and he was real, and he lived under like a bleeding tree full of skulls, and he had sharp teeth, and there was a witch, and it was all kinds of crazy crap in that movie. But that's its own thing. That is not at all Washington Irving's story. So in this one, Brom is dressing up as the Headless Horseman and chasing after Ichabod Crane, trying to scare him out of town. Well, there's also the character who I spoke of before, who's believed to be dead. He's believed to be the spirit of the guy that was the last victim of the Headless Horseman. But he's not actually dead. He's just kind of a crazy guy walking around scaring everybody because, he was scared out of town, but he's still just hanging around, basically homeless. And he keeps, crossing paths with Ichabod. So he's discovered to still be alive, and everyone realizes he's still there, he's not a ghost, this is who Ichabod was seeing, while Ichabod is being chased by Brom Bones, dressed up like the Headless Horseman. Well, during this chase, another Headless Horseman starts chasing, and Ichabod ends up chasing this Headless Horseman because he believes that this is the man who's believed to be a spirit and now exposed not to be, and he wants to expose him because he thinks he's pretending to be the horseman. So Ichabod's chasing the horseman in like a twist on the original. But Brom, as the horseman, gets exposed. It's very complicated. He gets exposed in front of the woman who loves him, who's obsessed with him, that he's not interested in, and her father. And when they find out what he's been doing, he's been running people out of town and stuff, they threaten to arrest him, so they blackmail him. They won't tell anybody what he's been doing if he marries that other woman who loves him. So he gets blackmailed into marrying this other girl. So Ichabod is chasing the Headless Horseman and runs into Katrina and tells her that that's, the guy that was run out of town, that everyone thought was dead. And she says, oh, no, they just found him in a barn. He was, he gets stuck in a barn. He gets stuck upside down. So then he ends up staying in Sleepy Hollow, which never happens in other versions. Ichabod does not stay in Sleepy Hollow. But in this one, he stays in Sleepy Hollow, implied he's going to marry Katrina. But then there's the joke at the end. It's like, oh, crap, that actually was the Headless Horseman. So in this one, the Headless Horseman is real. He was just kind of running around laughing, minding his own business, and everyone else kind of got involved. So he doesn't run anybody out of town. He actually gets chased in this one. So it was a funny, cute twist on the story. There's a lot of other funny additions they added, like, you know, all the people in town believe that this Native American spirit is reborn in this owl who hangs out in the schoolhouse, and, you know, they all call him by his Native American name. And although Jeff Goldblum doesn't believe that he is actually the Native American spirit, he still calls him by that name all the time and kind of almost treats him like a pet. And there comes a point later on where, you know, pranks where it's made to look like the owl's been turned to wood, just to scare Ichabod, because, you know, that's the whole point, is trying to scare Ichabod out of town. But it's just, there's a lot of good comedy surrounding that, and the whole dynamic of, you know, the two different women was pretty well done. And that is actually a little true to the Disney one, just less mean. In the Disney one, there's the short, heavyset girl who, you know, they're at the ball dancing and all. And Katrina is the one that Ichabod and Brahm are going after, and the other girl really wants to dance with somebody, but nobody wants to. So they keep stealing Katrina from each other as they're dancing and shoving the other girl in the other one's hands instead. And like, she's treated as like a punishment to dance with her. So you can almost think of the girl in this movie who isn't Katrina as being the same character as the one from the Disney movie, although they look completely different. So yeah, in general, it's definitely not like the adaptation of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow for me, because like I've said, there's so few film adaptations that really do it faithfully, and that's true for most literature adapted into film. But Legend of Sleepy Hollow, it seems like most versions take a lot of liberties. And this is no like big major Hollywood production or anything, but you know, it's close for how few films we've had of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Aside from the Tim Burton one, this is kind of the biggest production they probably ever did for The Legend on the big screen. I mean, aside from the Disney one, obviously. The Disney one's bigger, but as far as live action goes, this is probably the biggest live action Legend of Sleepy Hollow adaptation after the Tim Burton one. And although neither one of them is very faithful, I would say this one is actually more faithful to the story than the Tim Burton one was. But the Tim Burton one will get you in that Halloween mood more, even though, you know, I have my major issues with the Tim Burton one. I won't deny the fact that that one is better as like a Halloween horror movie, whereas this is like a fun comedy. And like I said, because they chose to make it take place in winter, it's really not very Halloween-y, although the story usually is like the most Halloween story of all time. So yeah, it's not my favorite version. I don't like love it, but I enjoyed it a hell of a lot, and I had a great time watching it, and I don't doubt that, maybe not every single year, but I will definitely come back and revisit this version other years in the future. It's something that is a fun watch for this time of year. So, as I said at the end of my last Search of the Spookiest video, I cannot believe I actually got all of these Halloween videos done. I didn't think I was going to get even 2 of these done, and I got all 6 of the ones I had planned done in October. So, thank you so much for listening to them. Actually, and a toy haul video. 7 videos in 1 month. That is the most I've ever done on this channel. I thank you guys so much if you listened to all of them or watched all of them. I hope you had a great time. I hope you have a great Halloween, and I'll see you with some more videos next month and beyond that. Do all the liking and subscribing and the sharing and the bell stuff.